Dubai Sevens, Tales from the Sand. On Dubai Eye 103.8.
Right then, another week and another episode of Tales from the Sand podcast brought to you by Dubai Eye 103.8. It's nice to be back. It's myself, Chris McHardy, and I'm seeing more of this guy than I'm seeing my other half at this moment in time. It's Mr. Tom Burwell, Tournament Director of the Emirates Dubai Sevens. Tom, how are you?
Chris, very well. You're seeing me digitally, so I'm hoping you're seeing your other half physically. So very good and exciting for another conversation this week with another legend of the game.
Yeah, and again, we go back to that famous Rolodex of yours, Tom. It's far better than mine because you've went Brian Habana, James Haskell, and you've produced another legend for episode 3. It's a lady who needs no introduction. It's a lady, of course, that you know well. She has been a regular to the Emirates Dubai Sevens in the past.
Yes, she has. I think it's probably because she's worked with both of those two often in the last few months, and we wanted to hear some truth for once rather than some embellished stories. But Nolli Waterman, it was great to speak to you in Series 2, and really looking forward to that now that Chris has joined the fray and we've become a radio show to chat and welcome you back to Tales from the Sand. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm living up in very sunny Scotland, would you believe? Not quite as hot as Dubai, but I mean, what a lineup, the boys, Brian and James, eh? I have the joy of working with them, as you say, Tom. And I think, to be honest, the only reason I'm regularly put with James is there's not many people that can handle him and need to keep him in his box. So I'll take that credit.
You've had the joy of both empty stadiums and slowly a few stadiums coming back, and James, I suppose, trying to be centre of attention. How has been part of presenting teams in this time, without sort of going into saying this unprecedented time as everybody does, but you've been part of presenting teams when there's been no one in there and 10,000 people. How challenging has that been to bring the same level of energy?
Oh, it's been really tough. I think the hardest bit is that there is an amazing amount of energy coming from humans when they're in the stadium, and the highs and the lows of rugby. And I think they tell the story for you, and, the emotions when the cameras can pan around. And yeah, it is hard. Fortunately, I have plenty of energy myself, so it's making sure that, I can match what's going on the field. But it hasn't been the same. And then having fans back, it's been brilliant. We're still not quite there. Obviously, we haven't had full stadiums. And interestingly, a lot of the players have actually said how different it is now all of a sudden going to having crowds, because calls are being difficult to hear, and you can't, you can't just naturally take for granted, exactly what's going on, and then you can hear the ref and you can hear whatever's happening with your teammates. So yeah, it has its challenges, but hey, we've all got through it. And what's been brilliant is that we've actually been able to have rugby as one of the few sports that's been able to continue.
You're not wrong on that front, Nolli, and we all enjoyed, I'm sure you did too, the Lion series not so long ago as well. And listen, just on the commentary aspect, if we can, because I've been doing a power of reading, catching up on what you've been up to over the last couple of years, Nolli, and there's so much to get into, and I want to delve into the kind of transition. I know a lot's been said, and finding her voice. We're going to get to that, I'm sure, over the course of this podcast, over the course of the next hour. But your own kind of transition from the field to the commentary box, it's an interesting one. It's one that I certainly, from looking in, you've done a great job. I must say that. How have you found it? How have you found kind of the last 18 months to 2 years?
A mixture, really, like super fun at the same time as super challenging. During my career, as I spoke about in the documentary, I had, unfortunately, quite a few injuries that sidelined me for a decent chunk of time. And I came through the generation where women's rugby was starting to be televised. It was starting to have far more media attention. So they needed people to put their hand up and go and sit in the studios or in the commentary box. And I just thought, why not? Give it a whirl. What's the worst that can happen? I can just get back playing and forget that it ever happened. And, I think just taking those opportunities gave me the confidence and the courage to be able to say, you know what? Why not continue doing this? I think probably the hardest bit about it all is there are very few women doing it. Fortunately, Actually, in the sevens, I've worked with Ricky Swanell, who's a lead commentator from New Zealand. She is just one of the most incredible women, superb at her job, and being alongside people like her as a woman, I think really settled me into it, and to say, well, actually, it doesn't matter about my gender. It's just about getting out and knowing your stuff and having fun doing it. So yeah, it's been challenging, but I feel very fortunate to have the opportunities. And I will tell you, it is so much hard work. No one will ever appreciate how much research, how much... Oh my gosh, I think I've watched more rugby in the last 18 months than I did for my whole England career of 15 years, just to be able to have the little snippets of info and you know, opinions about the different players. But yeah, it's been good fun. And to become the first woman to commentate on UK terrestrial TV for the Lions, I genuinely was pretty blown away by Channel 4 giving me that opportunity. But as they said to me, you know, you're part of our team and we're really proud of what you've been doing, and you know, why would we not give it to you? So yeah, I think it's been a pretty whirlwind trip, but hopefully lots more to come.
Nolli, when the transition from professional sportsman, and I'm saying man for a reason, especially in rugby, is one that's well documented, partly because of the professional nature that the male game has been for a longer period of time than the female game. Do you think that there is a fundamental difference between that transition between coming to the end of a career in the women's game and the men's game? Or are those two things now very, very similar? Or are the battles that you're facing distinctly different in finding your voice, if you see where I'm going to, where perhaps James, he certainly doesn't need to find his voice any more than he already has, but he does need to be recognised in a different way to the way that he had been in the past. Are those challenges that are similar to one another?
To be honest, I think going through my career, 12 out of my 15 years with England, I was working full time. And I think actually being able to work isn't just about the money. It's about all the skill sets. It's about the human skills that you learn, the communication, the ability to manage, the, you know, time management, all of those things. And actually, I think that in itself has allowed me to transition away from playing far easier. I think for the guys that have only ever known rugby, I think it's a big enough shock to the system when you can't, or you decide to step away from playing, let alone whether that's been your job, your hobby, your passion, you know, since you left school. And I think from that point of view, I definitely would say I was probably at a slightly more of an advantage. I think a lot of the work that I've done away from the media has been coaching. That was my full-time job. I'm a level 4 qualified coach. So that goes hand in hand with a lot of the ambassador stuff that I do, especially with HSBC when we're out. So I've kind of got an advantage on that side. But I think the difference for me is that although women's rugby is starting to get far more well known, and there's, you know, players' names, especially from the Olympic Games, I'm sure we'll talk about that, you know, household names. A lot of people might know what England did. If they're rugby fans, they might know my name, but they wouldn't know who I was. And they're also, a lot of people have the opinion that women's rugby or women's sport isn't as good as standard or isn't as good as men's sport. So you've kind of got this proof point that people need to, you always feel like you have to prove your worth, or you have to prove why you're there, rather than one of the guys walking in and they've got guaranteed, you know, acknowledgement of their career and who they are, and oh my gosh, it's James Haskell, you know, and they had wonderful careers. But if you actually put stuff on paper, my career is pretty much the same as the guys, but it's just how people perceive that. And I think it's slowly changing because of how people are seeing the women's game. They're seeing that it's an amazing standard. It's different to the men's. We're trying to get that comparison away from it because we do play slightly different. So yeah, I think that's been the challenge. And for me personally, it's also haven't been very many people doing what I do. So when you're one of the first to constantly kind of break down those barriers, that comes with, well, for me, it's come with trolling. It's on the social media. It's come with not really necessarily believing in myself, not necessarily having someone to look to say, right, I want to be like that person. But when it has been hard, I suppose I've been really fortunate that I've had lots of people, and young players in particular, young girls, reach out and say, well, actually, if you're doing it, that means that I can. And I think that, yeah, it's an interesting journey, but it's something that I'm proud of. And when I reflect on it, I wouldn't have changed. I wouldn't have changed what I've done. Even though it's had its difficulties.
Just listening to you there, Nolli, it's interesting you used the word preparation. And I think back to Alex Scott. We're changing sports somewhat. Alex Scott, of course, now presenter of Football Focus, which is a football show over here in the UK. And I think it was Mika Richards, if memory serves, who came out to say that, hey, listen, Alex Scott is one of the best prepared analysts in football. That was, I think, last year he came out and said that. That kind of resonates with me because, naming no names, being in and around sport, there's an awful lot of pundits out there, and again, I'll name no names, who have openly admitted to me privately they don't do much prep, that it's all a bit of a laugh and a joke. So from
McHardy.
No, not at all. That's not the case for me, Thomas. I'm always prepared. But I wonder with that, because that to me is, A, it's kind of showing a lack of professionalism from them, but B, you saying that you're the best prepared, Alex Scott's similar. Is there always a sense that you're having to prove yourself? Is that something that you've got day in, day out when you come to the commentary box?
I think so. I think that I put that pressure on myself. I'm a competitive person and I'm driven and I want to succeed. And I don't like the fact that, I've come into this industry where there's this expectation, you've played at the top, you should be at the top in this other side. And as you guys know, the media is a totally different ballgame. So I have the own standards that I want to set myself. And yeah, I definitely feel like I also have to probably go above and beyond than the guys, because it's not just a given that women know about the game or that people know what I've done playing wise. It's interesting because actually a lot of the time they will look at the negatives. When people watch women's sport, they'll look at the things we don't do rather than the amazing things we do. And I think that that's the same possibly with the media and some of my own experiences. But yeah, I think it's strange to hear, and I've worked with a few people that probably haven't done the preparation they should have, but actually those people will never be in the positions long term. And you look at anybody that has been in their roles for a long time. So over in the UK, Ben Kay, Ugo Monye, Austin Healey, whether you like them as pundits or not, the reason they are there is because they work exceptionally hard off the field to make sure that they're current. They know where, all the law variations, what's happening with the coaches, the game, the minutiae in training that changes what happens on the field. So yeah, I think I'm really lucky that I have people like that. And in particular, someone like David Flatman, who is a great friend, but actually also a really good mentor in terms of showing me that you need to keep present, you need to make sure that you're working hard, because there's always new people coming through, there's always new faces, and you've got to show your worth and show that you're there long term.
Nolli, I was going to ask about the growth of the 15-a-side game. I know that we want to talk about sevens, and we will talk about sevens and some of the fabulous things that we saw in Tokyo and your unique position of what happened to you in Rio. I'd love to hear about that. And I've seen some of the things that have come out about that. But I thought to myself, it's probably great that the Premiership champions for men and women are the same club, because whatever Harlequins do now for their men when they're heroing their men's team, they clearly have to do for their women's team. And seeing clubs like Harlequins and Saracens competing regularly at the top of the men and the women's game is surely just a huge bounce for the women's game itself.
Harlequins have been at the forefront of their women's program, of the women's game, for a long time. And I think for both of those clubs, and also you saw Exeter Chiefs have their women's team for the first time last season, coming in at I think sixth, because they were just pipped with points difference, but they beat all of the top four teams. What's great about all of that is, yes, okay, they've got the resources around them playing wise, and they obviously look after them from a coaching perspective, etc. But actually, to me, the more impressive stuff is the marketing and the social media and the coverage and the PR around them. You go to the stadiums, you go to the Stoop, and there is pictures with every male player. There's another female player somewhere around the stadium. On the social media posts, they're not just cheap, take a photograph on your phone. They are properly branded. All of the artwork is so professionally done. So I think from that perspective, what's been brilliant is, Exeter Chiefs don't have a women's social media handle. They just put them under Exeter Chiefs. They use the same bus. It's all of that branding that professionalizes the game. And actually, I think what seeing that around the Allianz Premier 15s in England and the UK, but in 15, sorry, but actually what's been brilliant over the years in sevens, and in particular in Dubai, is that all of that branding with the men's and the women's is all on the, it's with, I think it was a couple of years ago when all of the main games were on that first team pitch with everything there, the footage, the coverage, everything with HSBC. I think it just puts everything on the same level playing field. It's what people come to expect from men's sport. So why don't we make women's sport look good? Because actually, if you don't put it, if you don't give it the same coverage, the same camera angles, the same footage, it looks cheap. It doesn't look as good. You put the right coverage on it and the right branding and everything, and it looks awesome.
Well, I think it would be wrong of me not to mention at this point, because I know that she's listening, but our head of content at the Dubai Sevens is a female rugby player. And she tells us every single day to make sure that we are doing things not the right way because they've got to be done the right way, but because she says, look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this. And for us, it's quite often trying to get her to hero some of the men's games and us not us disagreeing. But I know we couldn't agree more, and I think the responsibility is on all of us to ensure that the best rugby and the best personalities and the best characters, irrespective of gender, the things that make our sport so great are heroed in the same way. And I think that probably brilliantly moves us on to a Ruby Tui interview that was, obviously has gone so remarkably viral. How great are the Black Ferns? And we said the same about Australia 5 years ago, as ambassadors for not just the female game, but for the entire game of rugby.
They're just wonderful. I think 5 years ago, you're completely right. Australia had absolutely blitzed that year. Tim Walsh had taken them to a new level. The rugby that they were playing was just awesome, and the skill sets that they had, and especially what was really unique about that Australian side 5 years ago is the vast majority of them hadn't come from union. They hadn't really come from sevens. They'd actually transitioned from touch. And so you saw this totally different type of athlete coming into rugby, which I think engaged a completely different audience. You then fast forward 5 years, the Black Ferns have just completely obliterated everybody, taken the game to a new level, which is all credit to them because they've been at number one for a long time, but they've always challenged themselves to get better and better. And actually, it's the stuff on the field, which is all, the levels of physicality, fitness, speed, skill is just, it's amazing to watch. But then like you say, it's the personalities of it. Ruby's interview is just completely Ruby. I think that, we ask athletes from any sport to be themselves, and she's 100% that. I think maybe 110% herself. And I think probably the unsung hero of that team is actually Sarah Hirini, their captain. Went through a really tough time earlier this year, losing her mum. And then actually, not only to probably be, for me, the player of the tournament at the Olympic Games, but also to be the flag bearer for New Zealand. I think to have a rugby player at the forefront of one of, in our sport, yes, of course, but, a small Olympic country in the grand scheme of things, but actually putting rugby there and rugby sevens there, I don't know, it was really, really special.
You've talked about the kind of physicality, Nolli, and you're right to do that. And I look back and the growth of the women's game in particular. I think you made your debut, forgive me if I'm wrong, 2003. You were 18 at the time. 18 years have since elapsed. Do the quick maths and you'll get Nolli's age. Never reveal a woman's age, by the way. And then, of course, you look at the growth. What's the biggest for you, Nolli, looking in, and you played a part of it up until last year? What's the biggest change in the women's game?
I was always really privileged. So in 2003, as I was still at school, rugby was something that I'd done since I was 5. I was sat from before my first cap, the day before, at lunch, and I'd actually played longer than somebody in the England team that had got over 40 caps because they started at university. And I think the biggest thing for women's rugby now is the support and the structures that are in place to allow girls to come into the game earlier, the acceptance that it's a sport for all, and also the acknowledgement that there needs to be a pathway, there needs to be appropriate programs in place, and also genuinely the globalization of the game. You know, over in Asia, they have the Pass It Back program, and over 50% of the participants and over 50% of the coaches are female. You know, so it's reaching areas of the globe that rugby probably hasn't touched before, and women are at the forefront of that. You know, Fiji getting a medal in Tokyo was just out of this world for the women's program, and I love it. And it's not just because they're strong in 15s, they are totally embracing every type of rugby. So yeah, and now, you know, the elite players, kind of fast forwarding back, when I got my first cap, they worked full time, but they were incredible athletes. I had amazing role models. There was nothing accepted about being, you had to be the best you could be physically, and there was no excuse whether you're working, whether you're a student. And so I always had that within England, but that wasn't kind of rippled across the nations. Obviously, we've now gone professional in the vast majority of the top sevens programs. A few of the 15s countries have, but the senior players now, because they're professional, they can do the rest and recovery. They can make sure that their bodies are transforming their skill sets, and they're absolute rock stars. They are amazing. You know, watching them, I'm like, oh my gosh, like how fast they are, how physical they are, how skillful. Like, it's awesome. And you see young girls with their neck, you know, with Tui written on the back, or Hirini, or, you know, I just think that's what it's about. So yeah, I think it has changed a lot, but I'd probably say the fact that there's so many more countries playing, and just how good our elite players are.
So talking about inspiration, and I think Abby Brown spoke about the journey that some of those GB girls are probably on now, where they're looking back and they're taking themselves out of the disappointment and putting themselves in the shoes of that they were still in a position to inspire. That's a difficult process, and one that you probably know pretty well. How challenging was losing a medal match at the Olympics? Because that's unlike any other game in rugby, right? Like, that third place game at the World Cup doesn't mean anything whether you win third or fourth, but at the Olympics it means everything.
It was brutal. You know, for me personally, I went through a really tough journey getting to the Olympic Games. I had written an email to retire. I'd actually got a massive knee injury, and they'd told me you're probably not going to play again. And that was so just over 20 months out from the Olympic Games. And I was pretty stubborn. I got on. It took me 5 months to walk down the stairs, and then I kind of slowly got back into running and got back on the field. So even just to be on the plane to Rio was a big achievement. I probably wasn't where I wanted to be physically and where I was playing, which was tough, you know, as somebody that had always been at the top of the game, and you know, to feel like I wasn't performing as well was difficult. Then to be at a multi-sport games, at the time women's rugby wasn't in the Commonwealth Games, so for us to finally be at a sporting event, the biggest in the world, and you've got so many different sports. I mean, guessing the sport from all of the different athletes, this little tiny gymnast, which Emily Scarrett nearly crushed one in the food hall. She was so small. And then everyone trying to work out who we were, because they just like looked at us and couldn't work out our shape and size. But to then playing and you know, it was really hard. Australia 100% worthy winners. You know, New Zealand had been pushing them all year, so I think the gold medal match was the perfect one, really. But unfortunately, we'd literally been battling it with Canada, and we'd win one, they'd win one, we'd win one, and we absolutely blitzed them in the pool. Maybe to our detriment, and then in the third, fourth, they came out, and fair play to them. John Tate had a game plan that allowed us, well, made sure that we didn't play as we wanted. And yeah, I think it was hard because it was those mixed emotions. I'd gone on a personal level, I'd gone through all of that. There were a lot of senior players. We'd had really long sevens careers. Finally to have it. I remember the day that it had been announced 7 years earlier. You know, and I was trying to work out, how old will I be? Oh my gosh, I'm going to be in my 30s. I'm super old. There's no chance I'll make it. To then being there in 14 minutes, losing.
Going back to the changing rooms, and then having to go up into the stands, and I was really lucky. Lots of us had friends and family. I had parents, I had my partner, my brothers, and them being so proud. But all I could think of that I had failed, and in floods of tears watching the final, when I ended up leaving. I couldn't watch the game anymore, and I just, so it was hard. But I think when you look back at it, we put sevens on the map, and I think you have this personal upset that you haven't achieved your goal. But then if you look at the broader picture, and now obviously I can look at the broader picture of watching the girls over in Tokyo, I couldn't have been prouder than them. So it's nice to actually have gone through that full circle and come back to it and thinking, it's strange that was me 5 years ago, but actually we did do a lot. We did do a lot for the game. We did do a lot for Team GB. And actually, I'd spent a long time with the Team GB staff. With my knee injury, I was in their rehab unit. I was there for 4 months. I got to know them really well, and I was so pleased to be able to spend, the opportunity to be in the kit and be there and see them and say thank you to them personally. But they actually said to me, Team GB really emphasised the team. And a lot of sports, we take for granted how we behave in rugby. A lot of sports aren't as open and as supportive as we are. And they actually said how much they loved having rugby sevens, because we totally encapsulated what it meant to be an Olympian and what it meant to be part of Team GB and the team part of Team GB. And I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but I was so proud of our sport. I was so proud of rugby sevens, because actually it was people that didn't need to say that. They didn't need to talk to me about the sport. But that to me probably meant just as much as being there, because I just thought, we've done ourselves proud as rugby players. And I think that will hopefully keep us in the games long term.
So I've spoken to both Tom Mitchell and Dan Norton since getting back, and they said one of the great challenges was that, post the Olympics, that sort of period of being in Rio or being in Tokyo and just submerging yourself in the wonder that is the Olympic Games was taken away from them this time. So they lose their bronze medal game, and they almost immediately get on a plane and have to deal with the downtime sort of on their own at home.
Yeah.
Is that only exacerbating what you felt in Rio? Because as you say, your parents and your brothers and so on there, and they were able to get their arms around you straight away, which wasn't possible this time. It must have been very different.
Yeah, I think it was really nice to be able to see them and have them there, to be able to escape, because I went and met them on the beach, and but then I also felt tremendously guilty for them coming all of that way and us not winning a medal. And I think you hold that, and then you get this real frustration that you don't really want to talk, and my mum's going, oh, what do you want to do this, and you kind of then end up like a stroppy teenager, like snapping and shouting, and so it's this kind of this torment where you desperately want them to be there, you desperately just want to hug, and you just want to be with them, but then you take out all of that frustration, all of that emotion that you only ever do to your closest family and friends, that you only ever show because they kind of accept you for being that person. And so you've got the ability to do that. And I felt a bit guilty that they traveled that far. And I think it must have been really hard for the boys. I think and the girls and all of the athletes at the games, I think probably the only comfort from it was that everyone was in the same boat, and that they didn't stay there for too much longer. They came home. I think it's probably pretty hectic for the boys with family and children to come back to. Maybe it was a nice distraction. But it's like anything, when you solely focus on everything, and given the focus that they've had, training in their garden, changing their lot, like with all the contracts, everything that's happened for the Team GB crew, it's not even what happened at the games. It's like, well, what now? And some of those boys will retire. Some of them will step away from the game completely. Some of them will stay in coaching, or, might test the water and might be out in Dubai, who knows, in a few months' time. But it's a weird, lonely space, even though you're surrounded by people when you come home from an event like that. And I felt it with the World Cups when I came back, because you're focusing on something for 4 years. Everything is training. You're around your teammates all the time. Everything is about you, your body, your mind is all about performance. And you come back and it's not anymore. But the Olympic Games was a different level. I don't know what it was. I don't know whether it was because we came fourth, because actually I got silver medals, and that losing in that final couple of times was pretty tough. But yeah, there was a different level to the Olympic Games, which can't really explain, but it's only time that I suppose helps heal.
Well, just on that, Nolli, because I'm fascinated by what goes on inside the athletes' village. It's legendary. And I wonder, take us back those 5 years, if you can, to Rio. What's it like? Paint us a picture of what it's like. Are you milling around? Are you integrating with the other athletes from different countries, etc.?
It's just mad. Like, I can't even explain it. I think what's really cool is you're seeing all of these athletes in all of their different countries' colours and the Olympic rings on their chest, and you just think, oh my gosh, this person is achieving a dream. I have no idea what sport they have, and I don't even know what country they are from, but actually they're and one of the coolest things, when we first arrived in the afternoon and the BBC were there and we did all these interviews, and we went upstairs and I was sharing a flat, and we had Abby Brown and Jazz Joyce, who is now 2-time Olympians, and I think they were honestly like 10 years old, running around the flat, like checking. It was so cute. Honestly, it was awesome. And and then walking to dinner for the first time, literally the first kind of athlete that I properly acknowledged, because when we arrived it was all a bit chaotic, was a Mongolian wrestler, and I just remember thinking, he's got a really big head, like, wow.
Mongolian wrestlers are really big heads.
It was literally, you think that you're not going to see all of the big mega stars, but you do. They're all in there, just getting their food. And so we were sat down at dinner once, and this place is huge. It feeds 10,000 people, right? So it's massive, big dining hall. And we were sat down, and there were people like kept walking past and like kind of looking at us, chatting, and we were thinking, no one cares about women's rugby that much, like what is going on? And like we were like oblivious, like eating away. And it wasn't because of us, unfortunately. It was because Usain Bolt was sat behind me and I had no idea. And then actually one of the evenings we were there, it was really special, because there was all this like giggling and twittering behind me, and I was trying to work out what food to have. And I turned around, and it was the American women's gymnastics team. And they'd literally just come from winning team gold. And they'd come in, and they'd got their medals, and they had all of their makeup in their in their little tracks. I mean, they're all teeny tiny. I felt, it's the only time I think I ever felt like a giant. Bearing in mind I'm 5'4", and I was like towering above Simone Biles. And I think obviously it was amazing to see medalists with the medals and stuff, but also the sheer joy and happiness and just this elation that they'd done it. And I don't know, like it was really cool to witness that. So yeah, it's cool. And the other thing, we played guess the sport, because you literally have no idea. I mean, you've got the big swimmers that are kind of like spatulas, quite thin, quite wide at the top, and then gymnasts are like little, and no one could really work out rugby, because the boys were probably the most muscly. You'd think that there's a few big sprinters, but yeah, they were admired by quite a few, I think, our Rugby Sevens boys.
That's great. It's great memories. And I wonder, you mentioned that it was Canada who you came up against, and you forget, of course you don't, but you're a world champion as well. A lot of people will gravitate towards the Olympics because sevens back in the Olympics, and it's great to have the sport put on the pedestal that it was. I'm sure you've had the question a million times before. That World Cup success in 2014 or an Olympic medal, if you could swap, would you?
It's weird, right? Because I love 15s and sevens equally, but for totally different reasons. Like sevens is awful. It's so painful when you're playing. I mean, Tom, you're shaking your head because you know that pain, but you seem to want to come back for more. Like it's the oddest feeling. But then I love the tactical side, the real traditional side of the union. I love, when I'm in sevens, I really miss my big, strong forwards, the girls that come and they look after us and do all the hard work in 15s. We don't get all of those in sevens, unfortunately. We have to do it ourselves. We have to go into the breakdowns and things. I'm like, what's this all about? I think as a child, it would have always been a dream to become an Olympic champion. To win an Olympic medal was just, oh my God. But then I never found a sport that I was good enough to go to the Olympics, and then all of a sudden it was rugby. But I think to win a World Cup, I think the biggest thing about that was the personal journey a lot of us went on. There were 6 of us that was our 3rd time. We got 2 silver medals and then got the gold. But also what it did for women's rugby. I think to finally get the cup out of the Southern Hemisphere for the first time in 20 years, and what that did for women's rugby was huge, because all of a sudden Europe took notice. The biggest nation, with the RFU, took notice, and it put women's rugby on the map. And I think that, winning BBC Team of the Year was like sports personality, like it was mad. We were up on the stage a couple of times, and I think all of a sudden people acknowledged that women's rugby was good, but our team were great, and we were really great globally. And it was a massive changing point for us.
Nolli, you've talked about being a level 4 coach, and the great equalizer of rugby is the ability to coach, right? And I think we've seen that across many sports all over the world as perceptions have changed, and the reality is that someone's knowledge is someone's knowledge, irrespective of the mouth that's coming out of.
Yeah.
You talk of going into the media and been involved in so many different things, but coaching is a real passion, and there's a certain fire brigade that you've been spending time with. Tell us a little bit about Summer Social, because Ed and Rob are dear friends of Dubai Sevens, and I was very jealous to have seen you guys enjoying a bit of a party and playing some good rugby in Richmond the other weekend.
Oh, honestly, Tom, we had the best time. So a few years ago, my partner he's been playing for the Italian Fire Service Cavaliers team over 20 years. And we were supposed to be going to the World Police and Fire Games in China. I was supposed to be going as a WAG for the first time ever. I was like, this is going to be amazing. I can go on rugby tour and not have to play and do the hard work. Anyway, he said, look, the coach can't come. Can you coach? And I was like, yeah, no worries. Thinking it was his team, which was the over 35s. And then he started asking about programs. And I was like, are you joking? I mean, my program is just to make sure that you get to the pitch, and make sure the kit fits over your bellies. But yeah, it transpired that it was coaching the open side. And my initial reaction was, no way, I can't coach. They might not super experienced enough. And then their reaction was, she's too qualified. We can't have a coach that's an Olympian and done all of the things she's done. Anyway, we came together, had the best 11 days in China. Crazy place to visit and play rugby in 40-degree heat and 90% humidity. We always thought Dubai was hot. But yeah, we ended up winning. And that was the start of my role with them. And we were desperate to do a week where they would do some team building. And last year we'd arranged for them to come to London, because I just thought, you know what better way? Come to London, enjoy the week. I can pull in favours, get all sorts of kind of razzmatazz around you. And Summer Social is great because it's only it's been only a one-day tournament. It means that you don't have to. You can still train a reasonable amount in the week. So you've kind of, and then obviously then there's a bit of a party afterwards. So yeah, Rob and the team were really great. They supported us coming over, and we had the best time. The boys played in the elite tournament. We ummed and ahed. I ummed and ahed. Are they good enough to be playing against these boys that are on the series over in the UK? And I just thought, you know what? If we want to experience the top, if we want to set a bar, then let's go for it. And the first game was against the Jesters, who were the reigning champions. So it was a bit of an eye opener for them. But they played on the main pitch. It was a beautiful day. We got through to the plate semi-final, and we actually beat the Navy, which was unbelievable. And then we gave Apache a really good run for their money in the final. But unfortunately, we didn't win. But just to be at a sevens tournament where loads of different teams. I mean, there was tens of different teams from all around the place. Crowds, the vibe, the music, all the food. It was it was pretty cool. And I'm pretty sure I'm still one of the few females at coaching a men's sevens side, and I'll take it as a compliment that a few of them thought it was the Italian national side. We're not. We're the fire service.
Andy Vilks thinking, hang on, have I lost my job?
I'm coming for you, Andy. I'm not Italian, it's fine.
Is that the next step though, Nolli? Because I'm a big American football fan, and the last 12 months we've seen a lot more females, not the head coach, not the top job, but we're seeing more female coaches at the NFL level working on offense or defense. Is that the next step in a lot of ways? We've talked about, and rightly so, that the growth of the women's game is the next kind of natural step, more females coaching in the men's game.
And females coaching in the women's game. You know, you've only got to look at the elite level of the sevens program, how many women are actually pitch side.
Yeah.
And it needs to change. It needs to change for lots of different reasons. And there is a slight transition. I think, you know, there hasn't been women that have got the experience, but how do you get the experience if you don't get the opportunities? So I think, you know, in the women's 15s game, World Rugby have put in an initiative where every nation at the Rugby World Cup next year all have someone doing kind of a work experience role. So they will come in and shadow, and they have been given an accreditation to go all the way through, and the nation has been able to select someone who's one of their up and coming coaches as a young female, which I think is huge, because if you don't have the experience, if you can't put something on your CV, how will you ever take that step? For me, I think the other side of it is also women believing they're good enough. You know, for me, I instantly said, oh no, I can't. That I probably couldn't be any more qualified to go and coach that side, but yet my personal reaction was to step away. And I think what I'm really
overqualified. You'd be the overqualified. You'd be the most qualified at a level 4 in that tournament at Summer Social. You would be the most qualified World Cup winning level 4 coach there. And it's interesting that means that there's still an element of reaction there of should I, shouldn't I? And that means that we've got a way to go in educating young female coaches to believe in that skill set as much as anything.
Yeah, 100%, because it's not just about, I mean, people go, oh, I didn't get the people, there's not the opportunities, there's not the chance, men get, how much is also your own personal area? And I always try and champion, you know, you've got to be brave. You've got to put yourself out there. And hopefully people, again, it's kind of like with the commentary, if people see me doing it, they can see that there is that opportunity and avenue. It's just like with the sevens and coaching. There are female coaches coming through, Tamara Taylor, Rocky Clark, Amy Turner. You know, there are players that are level 4 coaches now, Kat Merchant, that are getting experience, but they're not doing a lot in the men's game yet. And I think there's a way to go for that. But I definitely think there's a massive place for it. And interestingly, I spoke to a couple of our new players with the Cavaliers, and they'd never been coached by a woman before. And I said, you know, how do you find it? What is it? What's different? You know, one of them trains and plays at Heartbreak. And he just said, you've got a different human touch. And I think it was interesting that, and he actually said, but that's not gender. He said, that's also you, because there are guys that have got that. But if you look at a lot of the skill sets that, you know, some of the top coaches have got, so Pat Lam in particular, the fact that he's really strong on culture, really strong on family, really strong on giving people confidence. A lot of those skills are ones that women will naturally tend to have. They might not all, I'm not saying all women have got it and all men don't, or all men don't. Do you know what I mean? I'm not saying that at all, but I think there's definitely things that are pushing towards away from that real dictatorial coach that stands and screams and shouts at people, and that old school view, because players just don't respond. Like, who responds to that? And I think we're now having that voice from players to say, we don't want that. We don't, you know, we want to be looked after differently. So yeah, it's been a good experience coaching. I had so much fun. And the best bit, actually, we had the Cavaliers Olympico, obviously, down at Bushy Park. It was one of the highlights of the week, our team building. And the boys had never done egg and spoon, apple bobbing, orange transfer on the chins, balloon popping. They haven't done any of it. So the Cavaliers Olympico was a massive hit. And we've now sent some English traditions back to Italy.
Brilliant. I love that. Are you getting a special invitation, Tom? Is Nolli's team out for the Emirates Dubai Sevens?
There is always an invitation for a team coach by
this
Nolli.
Is recording, so I have got you.
It is. But you're wearing that red shirt, so you might be here anyway, right? So it's whether you're going to wear a blue one or a red one out here is more the question. Actually, on the red shirt, I saw you went and saw a group of young boys, I believe. Was it yesterday? It was close to my heart, the UR Sevens Academy, that that are you doing fitness finance? Is that something that HSBC are doing now with younger rugby players, using the sport to kind of inspire a level of understanding in and around finances? Is that the goal?
Yeah, so it's really cool actually. It's a financial fitness program that HSBC do loads in the education space. And Sven Glor, our crazy Australian that we all love, who looks after the ambassador program and all the connections and sponsorship from a rugby perspective, basically was like, we've got all of this amazing resource within HSBC. Why don't we transfer it and give it to athletes and young aspiring athletes and across sport to help athletes that actually probably haven't ever had that help and actually are dealing with quite small budgets. They're trying to live this life, whether they're semi-professional, professional, making sure that they're set up for the future. And we've done it with a couple of different people. So we've rolled it out with Rosden Park at the men's and the women's team. And then, we spoke to the UR Sevens guys who are 14 to 17 academy guys yesterday, which was brilliant. It was myself, Ben Ryan, David Flatman hosted. So you can imagine the tone that he set, which was fab. And we just talked about our own experiences and actually, what it was like being an amateur rugby player, but playing at the elite level. And Ben was talking about some of his challenges coaching Fiji, who, when they're starting to they don't have that much money and then they're starting to give these contracts. What does a contract look like? And I think, as athletes, often people assume that you get that support. They assume that you understand all those things. But you don't. You rarely get that help unless it's coming from home. So I think it's been brilliant. And the HSBC team also were on there and they were delivering from their side of things, probably a far clearer description of everything than we could give. It was fun. And I think the more that we can help athletes understand, because from an emotional perspective and mental well-being, we talk a lot about psychology, we talk about performance, we talk about our physical well-being, but actually if you think about it, when you step back, finances actually determine so much of that. They provide you with the opportunity to be able to buy the equipment, to travel, to have the nutrition, to also, if you come from a background where you don't necessarily have the money and you're feeling like your money has to be transferred home, or you're a carer or whatever it might be, it can put a massive strain on you. And if that strain is there and it's eating away at your brain, then you're not going to be able to dive in as an athlete and be 100% present in that situation. So I think it's brilliant. I think it's a really cool initiative and it's just starting to grow. But I think it's something that I know I would have benefited from definitely growing up. So it's cool to help with it.
Nolli, I've got one last question for you. We've talked a lot about media and we've talked about coaching and I suppose the way that the opportunities for females in coaching and females in the media is only going to exponentially grow over the coming 5-10 years. We're now in a massive growth period for the women's game. So where does your involvement in the sport ideally fall? Is it that you can't quite take your hands away from it totally and you want to find a role in the professional game that you can get something out of? Or is it talking about the professional game? Where are you going to get your professional rugby fix from?
You know what? It's been really interesting because one of the hardest things when you retire from elite sport is everyone says, oh, what's your job? What are you doing now? And I'm like, well, if you got about 5 minutes, because I've got a few different roles and a few different hats that I wear, and most of my brains are pickled at the moment. So whichever one you want is in there at the moment. I'll go and have to find it. But I think doing the variety of stuff has been amazing, and I think it's been important for me to say yes to opportunities, to not just the things that I enjoy, but also find the things that I'm like, nah, that's not quite for me. I've been fortunate with the opportunities with the media, as we've been talking about with commentary, and also with the coaching. I think coaching is probably a longer term thing for me, but to do them hand in hand full time is impossible because of when I'm commentating on a game, I would be pitch side coaching. So I've gone for the media at the moment. But I think one of the other things that I have absolutely loved doing, and one of the biggest places I can make a big difference, is with my ambassadorial roles. So the first global ambassador with HSBC, and actually the role that I've had has been massive already. You know, they take me not just to the women's tournaments, but I was over in Vancouver a couple of years ago when it was the men's, and sending that message that it's rugby. This is one of the people that represents our sport and can share the message. I think the other thing that, apart from obviously having a great time and enjoying Dubai, but being in Dubai with Brian Abana and George Gregan allowed me to share the experiences of the women, tell them the stories, point out the players, and start the season off. We then flew over to Cape Town, and in Cape Town, obviously, Brian is, you know, the Prince of Cape Town, and maybe even the King. And on the back of being in Dubai, coming into the HSBC box and having all of the pretty high-profile clients there, he answered the questions about the women's game, I answered the questions about the men's, and the power that has, and the facilitation of having male and female ambassadors together, the friendships that we have. You know, I tackled him into the pool and had all sorts of stuff. Tom, I am expecting a pitchside pool in Dubai. I mean, Cape Town have got a different level, so I'm no pressure, but I think it's those things that can make a big difference. The other thing that we've been working on is about equal pay, and how HSBC have now put in a huge amount of work to make sure that there is parity across the pay with the ambassadors. So from that perspective, they're making a big statement and they're doing something about it. So yeah, I think having a seat at the table with such an influential sponsor globally is huge, because I provide a voice that I think they're passionate about having there, but they've never quite known who to have or what to do about it. But actually now I have, you know, I probably talk more and a bit more bolshy than the boys, to be honest. I put them back in there.
Long may it last, Nolli. Long may it last. If Haskell's put in his box, then we're all happy, right?
He's not even part of the global team.
No, I know.
He needs some entertainment. And then
Yeah, that's it.
Listen, last one from me, Nolli, and I'll let you get on with your Highland day. I'm always intrigued by this. Your World Cup winning medal, is it in Scotland? Is it in a vault? Where is that medal?
So normally my medal is next to my bed, and it's actually stayed down in Gloucester. It hasn't come up to the Highlands, only because the car was pretty full and I didn't want it to be packed in with everything, and it didn't need to come up here. So it is down there. Interestingly, my silver medals, I didn't even know where they were until I won the gold. And then I was like, actually, I can look at them now. They're all right. They're not too bad. So yeah, they're somewhere as well.
Nolli, thank you so much. We've absolutely loved it, and we'll look forward to having you back in Dubai, whether that's coaching, whether that's with HSBC, whether that's with the Italian Cavaliers. Long may it continue. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you for having me. And don't worry, Dubai is my favourite stop. So I will be there and I will be enjoying myself. Yeah, for anyone that is wanting to pick a stop, I would definitely recommend Dubai. It's an entertaining one.
It certainly is. No doubt about it. Thanks
ever so much.
Dubai Sevens, Tales from the Sand. On Dubai Eye 103.8.